Hello. Uh, Good morning to you if this is the morning, good afternoon if this is good afternoon, and good evening if this is the evening time. Okay, now, uh, yes, I think I gave a brief introduction the other day on how this academic writing module works and what are the expectations of engaging in academic writing. Now, today we are going to discuss about three major things. Okay, the first thing is understanding the content of a research paper. So what I usually call it is the anatomy of a research paper. So we'll be going through each section of a research paper to understand what entails in a proper published piece of research. And having done that, once we complete that, we'll be discussing plagiarism and referencing, how plagiarism occurs and how to avoid that, and in order to avoid that we use referencing. So how that process works we'll be discussing today. Okay, and then the last thing that I want to discuss is how to form proper arguments, because cogency is something that is extremely important when it comes to academic writing. So these three things are the ones that I am going to discuss with you today. Now, before we start, I'll ask this simple question. Now, this is a question that almost all the time students keep on asking from me, and also it's a question that I have been trying to answer myself. And then I'm glad that I was able to answer that well. If it would be very difficult to teach right now, but then yes, this was a question that I was always considering when I was a student as well. The question actually is about research, because now you might wonder now why exactly I want to talk about research today. Here's the thing, you can't necessarily discuss about academic writing without research, because most of the times academic writing is something that we use to inform our readers or inform our colleagues in the community, right, which is the scientific community. Now, if we are to inform someone, then we have to make sure the information we provide is true. If they are not true, then my readers won't necessarily gain anything out of me. Because then if I'm saying just things that I think to be true, then there is no objectivity behind it. So I need to make sure it is something that is true, not just to myself, but for everyone else as well. So that kind of knowledge could only be gathered through research. So when you gather that kind of knowledge, it has to be presented in a particular way without any emotional attachments or being rude or maybe being too persuasive. So we don't do that here. We are being very neutral, but we use logic to convince the other person. So logic is very different from the day-to-day use of emotions in our writing. So this particular way of writing these things in a very neutral manner, using sophisticated terminology, yet in a way that it could be understood by a majority of individuals, is what we call usually academic writing. So it's the style of writing that we usually use in college education, postgraduate education, and then from bachelor's until up to Ph.D, that's the type of writing we use. Now, that is academic writing. Now, having said that, I just need to make sure that I do this differentiation now. If you already have been to a university, you might know the particular expectations they have in terms of your writing. So usually when you start your very first coursework, they would say, okay, here's how you need to do. But when you get to the second year, the third year, and the fourth year, the expectations goes up, and then they become more strict on your grading. Likewise, now this is not the bachelor's level and this is the master's level. So at this level, our expectation is that students do learn by themselves, and teachers, it's like myself, we provide some guidance. And having taken this guidance, students can find their own ways or navigate, in their own preferred ways in these programs. So I am giving that liberty as well, because that is exactly how we get ourselves to think, because critical thinking is extremely important in this kind of academic writing sessions and also in research. So you will learn more about research in upcoming lectures, but I want to give a basic impression on how this works so that you have a better understanding on the entire process of academic writing. Okay, now I think now is the time that we should go through the anatomy of a research paper. But before we go through the anatomy, I'll just introduce the basic sections of a research paper. Okay, right. Okay, so here we go. Now here I have got a research paper. Now this is the research paper, and as you see, there's an abstract and there's some information and things like that. Okay, so before we go through all this information, let me quickly get you through the most important information of a research paper. Now there's a question once again most of the students ask from me, that is, how to understand legit paper from like various other forms of fake or maybe not so legit papers, because now, as you may know, research has become a business. So many organizations just publish this information. So because of that, some of these journals are not actually credible, or they don't provide legitimate information or legit information. So because of that, you can't always use every research paper that you get. You have to check for some key information. Now, before we begin, I need to say another thing as well. Since this master's level, we don't use websites to get knowledge, and we should never use newspapers and other forms of blog, information written on blogs and things like that, because those are highly personal, and we don't need personal ones because we need research papers, right? Now let me quickly get you through this information. Now this thing right here is the title of the research. Okay, so whenever you want to find something, let's say now I gave you a coursework, and in the coursework I have asked you to write about leadership self-efficacy of South Asian students. Now suppose I haven't given any information, I just blankly ask you to write about this. So then you need to find information about a few things. The first thing is you need to first figure out who these South Asian students are, because not every Asian student is South Asian, right? And then you need to find about leadership. What kind of leadership am I talking about here? Am I talking about the day-to-day leadership that we do inside an organization? Am I talking about leadership inside a university? Am I talking about different, like concept of leadership? Because leadership is very different in the Eastern Hemisphere compared to the West, okay? In some cultures, collective nature and sacrificing things towards others is considered as leadership, while in some other countries, this individualistic kind of traits are highly highlighted in leadership. So there are differences. So then we have to figure out that as well. And if you figure out that, then you need to find what exactly leadership self-efficacy means. So not always papers, like give all these informations to you at the first time you search. So you need to keep on searching papers. Now, as I was searching these papers, I found this wonderful paper where it actually gives almost all the information that I want in just one go, because it says student success through leadership self-efficacy. So it discusses about leadership self-efficacy, now that I know. A comparison of international and domestic students. Now this is the title. This is the first thing that you would go through in a research paper, right? Now, okay, now the title is good. Now what do I need to look? The second thing that I need to look is who has actually written this. So here it says David H.K. Gwen, University of North Dakota, USA. Now most of the times, to understand the credibility of a paper, you need to go through its writer. Most of the times these writers are professors who are attached to certain universities. So whenever you go through the name, they usually give the exact institution they are attached to. Now here in this case, it's University of North Dakota, USA. And if you go through this entire journal article, you probably might find even his email as well. So whenever you have some extra questions that need to be clarified through the researcher, you can directly contact them as well. That is perfectly okay. Okay, that is how it works. Now, this is the title. This is the person who has written this document, and this is the title. The institution that he is attached to. Now, okay, the article sounds all right. The person sounds all right. Now, the next thing that I need to know is the journal. Has this information come in a valid journal? Because there are lots of fake journals these days. So we need to make sure this particular research paper is written or published in a credible journal. Now, this is the name of the journal. Journal of International Students. Okay, Journal of International Students. So this is something that you can search in Google to see, is this a real journal? So just by the face value of it, you can understand whether it is legit or not. So, of course, this one is a legitimate, journal of international students. And this right here, this number 6, is the volume number. Okay, so this is Journal of International Students, volume 6, and in the volume 6, this is the issue number. So this one is the 4th issue, 6th volume, 4th issue, and the paper is published in 2016, right? So the paper is published in 2016. And here it says it's a peer-reviewed article. In academic writing, we love this, peer-reviewed articles. So peer-reviewed means this. Now, for example, let's say I recently did a research, and then I wrote a report myself, and then I published it in a journal, in a local journal. Now, when I published this, they wanted to know whether this information is correct or not. Have I done a good job? Is my research methodology correct and all that? So what they do is they again send this paper, the paper that I have written, without including my name and all that, to two other individuals who are in the same field just like myself. For example, let's say now in my I'm a psychologist by profession, so I wrote a psychological paper, and it is being reviewed by two other psychologists. They don't know me, they might know me personally, but they don't know whether this paper belongs to me or not, and I also don't know whether they are going through my paper or not. So the editor of the journal coordinates this, and upon getting their evaluation, I do certain amendments, and then only I publish my paper. So this is exactly what we call a peer-reviewed article. So because now when you think about research, there are individuals who have lots of deluded ideas as well. So these delusions and all that can't be published in research. So because of that, someone has to go through this and find whether these are correct or not. So that is exactly what a peer-reviewed article means. And here we have an ISSN number. So ISSN numbers are numbers that usually books get when they are published. So this is a unique identification number. Okay, and online, volume 6, issue 4, published year 2016. Now in the Journal of International Students, 6th volume, 4th issue, this particular research paper appears in pages 829 to 842. Okay, right. Now after that, there is an abstract. Now what exactly is an abstract? Abstract is a concise summary of the entire research paper. Now, if the title is all good, if the information here seems legit, the next important thing that you need to read is the abstract. Now, just by reading the abstract, I am going to know whether this paper is useful for my work or whether it is not useful for my work. So it is very important that you always focus on the abstract. So abstract is extremely important, right? It says there is scarce research that examines the leadership experiences of international students on campus. Okay, that's good. Leadership capacity and efficacy are important indicators of success in higher education and are linked to important academic, career and life benefits such as career and leadership aspirations, work performance, the ability to cope and overcome stereotypes, and adaptation and persistence in the face of challenging situations, right? Yeah, so it says that they have done a particular study to see whether leadership changes from the international students to the domestic students. So now it seems like the paper is of some interest to me. So then this is what the abstract says. So this abstract provides a summary of the entire research. Now if this is appealing, then I continue to go through the rest of the sections, right? Now here we have the basic introduction, okay? Introduction, right? And it says leadership, self-efficacy and student success. So they have given too much information on, what leadership is, what leadership self-efficacy means, then leadership self-efficacy of international students, right? Cultural differences, English proficiency, leadership, because at one point some of these papers say that these students don't have the language proficiency as required, and that's the reason for them to have no proper, leadership activities, or the reason for not demonstrating leadership is due to lack of English proficiency. Now, that is just the introduction of the research paper, and then we have theoretical and conceptual frameworks. Okay, now this about theory. I'll introduce this to you in shortly. Okay, and the next section is research methods, right? And then we have research questions, sample. Okay, right. So these are some key information that needs to be included, right? Variables. Okay, now these are just additional information. Okay, now I hope you have a decent understanding right now about the main components of the research paper. Now if you understand up to this point, it's very good, because now I am going to make this slightly harder by introducing some other sections of the research paper. Okay, now since you will be viewing this online, I want to make this as interactive as possible. So why don't you get a book and a pencil or a pen, and then we'll go through each section of a research paper. Okay, sounds good? Excellent. Okay, so we'll do like that. Okay, now I think we discussed the main sections of a research paper. Now let's discuss these things in depth. Now we said the first component of a research paper is the title, right? Now when it comes to the title, there are certain things that you need to follow. A usual title should be about 12 words, okay? These are the guidelines provided by American Psychological Association. You might wonder why exactly psychological guys are this much involved in this academic writing. It is because APA is an organization that strongly advocates, certain guidelines on writing. So they keep on, publishing this information, and almost the entire America follows APA's guidelines. So they usually say if you write a paper, the title should not exceed 12 words. Okay, 12 words. Now, the title should also be, let me put it like this, it should be comprehensive. Okay, comprehensive. Even if someone is, let's say, 5-year-old, he or she still could be able to read and understand this. Okay, so anybody or everybody should be able to go through this and understand this. So it needs to be very comprehensive. No repetitive words. So don't repeat the same word again. No ethnicities or nationalities. You don't necessarily need to include that the following research is about, let's say that you do a research, so don't need to include that the research is about Chinese people, the research is about Japanese people, this research is about Christians, this is about Buddhists. We don't need to include that, so from the title you can take it off. Okay, no ethnicities or nationalities, right? What else? Yes, and then no biased statements, right? Now, just quickly recall what we need to do for our coursework. So it's about South Asian student leadership. Okay. A quantitative study on leadership efficacy. Okay, now I just wrote a title. Let's see whether we have met these requirements. Is it comprehensive? Well, I think it is comprehensive. South Asian student leadership, a quantitative study on uh, leadership efficacy. Okay. No repetitive words. Okay, now we got a problem here. We have two leaderships appearing, so I'm going to change this one. South Asian student leadership, a quantitative study on self-efficacy. Okay. So now I have another big question. So is my research about leadership self-efficacy or just self-efficacy? So that is something I need to clarify in my research paper. But before that, we'll have to first work on our title. So this is the title, so I'm going to just keep it like this. So no ethnicities or nationalities. Okay. Okay, we've got a slide problem here because now my study is entirely based on this group. So I am going to include South Asian. So this is just categorizing students based on the geographical location, but then I won't be including anything other than this. For example, a study on Indians versus Pakistan and things like that, they are not, encouraged. So because of that, those things have to be avoided all the time. But then the following study is about South Asian students, and because of that, I'll have to just go ahead and use that. So, but I'm going to just put it like that, South Asian, and no bias statements. Now, the bias statements is something like this. Now, there are some students who make titles like this. Hindered leadership potential of South Asian students. A quantitative study on self-efficacy. Now here's a small problem because compared to this, now this one is very general. I don't know because now before you do a research, you don't know whether you are going to get positive results or negative results, whether students are good in self-efficacy or not. You don't know that, right? So that has to be communicated just like that in your title. But in this title, it says hindered leadership potential. So hindered leadership means I already know that these guys don't have leadership. How come? If I do that, which means I am being biased because I already have a prejudgment about this group of individuals, and I am putting that in my title. So the title should always be neutral, right? The title should always be neutral, and not just the title. Your entire approach to research should be very neutral, because if you start the research by saying that okay, these people don't have it, then that means you don't have anything to find because you already know what to expect. It's okay to find a problem, but then having found the problem, we need to still be flexible in terms of what we would find. Because if you know the answer, then that's not a research. So to find the answer, we need to make sure our question or our approach is neutral. Because if not, we always end up getting things we want to find. If I personally believe that all Buddhists are very good and I want to do a research about the generosity of people based on certain religious groups, I obviously will write things in a way that will satisfy my expectations and my beliefs, which is, Buddhists are the most, like good or the kind hearted and the generous kind of people. So the research is fundamentally flawed because I believe this group to be very generous and very kind-hearted and all that, and I just have done that in my research. So a good researcher usually gets to the field in a blank slate. So we don't know what happens. So we are truly interested in what is happening, and then we are making a prediction. Like, okay, this is what I am thinking that I will find, right? But then still we don't know because this is just the title phase, okay? So in academic writing, it is extremely important that you focus on your title. The title has to be neutral always, okay? Now, that is that, right? So no more than 12 words. Now let's count the words 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? The next one is count the number of variables. Now, what exactly is a variable? Variable is something that always changes. The opposite of this is constants. So we don't have lots of constants, right? Everything in this world pretty much is a variable. Now, let me introduce the variables here to you. Now, this is our title. South Asian is a variable, okay, in my study. Student leadership, if not leadership, is another variable that I have in my study, right? Self-efficacy is another variable, okay. Now these are variables. Variables need to be kept at a minimum, no more than 3 variables, okay. It's okay to have more variables, but what happens is if you have too much of variables, it will take you a lifetime to write a proper research report because everything has to be justified, okay. Okay, let me quickly save this. Give me a second here. Okay. Okay. So, 3 variables. Now, in my research paper, I need to first explain who these South Asian students are. What exactly is meant by leadership and what exactly is self-efficacy. And if I have anything more than this, if I have more variables, which means I have to explain these other variables as well. So because of that, limit the research question or the title to 3 variables. Okay, so that's it, right? 3 variables, no more than 3 variables. Now I think we have a decent a title to work. Now the next thing that we need to do is to write our abstract. Now at this point I can't write anything about my abstract because I don't know about my study. So usually all the researchers write the abstracts towards the very end, and after that, so we'll just keep it right here and then we'll start with the introduction, the next important section of a research paper. Now what are we going to include in our introduction? The first thing is statement of a problem. Statement of a problem, right? And the next one is introduction to variables. Okay, introducing my variables, right? The next one is study objectives. Some people call it aims and objectives, okay? Study objectives. The next one is the research question. The next one is the hypothesis, okay? Extremely important things. Now, let's consider how to do this, okay? Now, what exactly is a statement of a problem? Now, here's a question. When I do research, I have been now supervised about definitely more than 50 research with students. And the first thing they ask is, okay, so what's the question? What do I need to find? And what they usually do is they usually get about 3-4 variables, somehow, like mix them together and come up with a title and say, Mr. Naren, I found a research question which is worth doing. So I ask, the first question is, why do you want to do this research? They usually say, okay, it's out of my personal interest. I really like this research and all that. So I don't care whether someone prefers a particular research or not, right? Because that's their personal preference. We don't need personal preferences in research. So we need to make sure there's a proper reason behind someone's intention to do a research. For example, if I say South Asian student leadership, a quantitative study on self-efficacy, one of the first questions anyone is going to ask from me is, why do you want to study about South Asian student leadership? Is there a reason for you to do this? So, statement of the problem. Now, usually the statement of the problem is not just a statement, it rather is a entire paragraph in its own right. Basically, what it means is reason for you to do this study. Okay, what is the reason for you to do this study? Now, I did this exact research a few years ago, and when I wanted to do this research, now my supervisor said, okay, Naren, find a good research topic and you come and meet me. I could not find a research topic for many years, not many years, 2 weeks. And then she asked, now what is that one thing that you are truly interested in finding? I said, I'm interested in finding self-efficacy of international students. And she said, okay, why do you need to find? Then I said, because a lot of students struggle with their presentation skills. Our students don't talk to other, like university students, the general American ones, and all that. And then she said, okay, you are making a valid point. Just see whether you find this information documented somewhere. Okay, now I started, kind of understand the process here. Now, if I am saying that I need to do a research on South Asian leadership, my supervisor is going to ask me, what is the reason for you to do this? Now, I need to tell her the reason. So, my reason was there are lots of students who struggle with the language. Students find it difficult to do presentations. Students find it difficult to mingle with other uh, uh, domestic students. Now, these are the reasons I gave. Now, the question she asked was, has this been documented somewhere? Now, if this has been documented somewhere, boy, you are very lucky, because then you got a problem to start your research. Okay, so statement of the problem is the reason for you to do the study. Now, I did a bit of digging and I found that Asian students struggle with English language. Okay, they struggle with English language. They have problems mingling with domestic students. Now that's another reason. Okay, a good reason. But is this enough? Because my study is about leadership. So has this anything to do with leadership? Now I need to find some documented problems about Asian student not in leadership positions. Now I was very lucky because I found a paper where it says most Asian students do not view themselves as leaders. Okay. Most Asian students do not view themselves as leaders. But now I really don't believe in that. I'm Asian as well. I certainly don't believe in that. So I told my professor as well, look, here's the thing, I don't believe this. Then she asked, why don't you believe? Then I said, look, we have this many, tech moguls like Sundar Pichai and then Satya Nadella and people like that. So I still couldn't find any information. So one day I was in the food city and I just met, in the food city my professor, and then she told, hi Naren, I just found this paper very interesting. It says a lot about, South Asian individuals and how successful they are. So you might need to go through that. And she got that paper and she went through her handbag. She couldn't find it. And then she said, okay, I'll give it to you tomorrow. And then she gave me that paper, which was very enlightening because it says South Asians dominate some of the leading positions in the tech industry. Okay, now this is my research. I need to give a solid reason for me to do this research. If you just go through these points, I pretty much have figured out a very good problem or a very good reason for me to do this study. Now, what is the problem? The problem is South Asian students do not have the required self-efficacy to become leaders. Okay, now I am going to write that problem. So I am going to use essay as South Asian students do not have the required self-efficacy to become leaders. Now, is this documented by someone else in legitimate research? If they have done it, then you have documented an excellent problem. Okay. If you don't have such a finding, so don't worry, you should be able to find it later. But now in my research, I was able to find one, which was the paper written by Gwen. So I'm going to just write Gwen 2016, the same paper that we went through. Now, I need to make sure that my readers understand the gravity of this problem. Why exactly this problem has become this much of an issue now? South Asian students do not have the required self-efficacy to become leaders. One of the reasons is most of the Asian students struggle with their English language. Who said it? A research paper documents this, so I need to find that reference and put it here. Okay, and they have problems mingling with domestic students. Okay, so who said it? Another research paper documents this, so I'm going to write research paper 2. And then most Asians do not view themselves as leaders as well. This was said by two individuals named Dugan and Communes 2007. I found this in a research paper. Right? Now, I have well supported this statement. They don't have the required leadership. Who said it? Gwen said it. And they have language issues, they have problems mingling, and they have also this issue of not viewing themselves as leaders. Now, I have documented a fabulous problem here with decent research support. Okay. Now, I need to make sure I have a valid reason to go through this study. Now, I need to show the reader in a convincing manner that there is more reason for me to go through this study. Despite this trend, a majority of tech companies are being led by individuals of South Asian origin. Okay. It is individuals of South Asian origin are leading a majority of tech companies. It is not clear why this group do not view themselves as leaders when the companies, when multi-billion-dollar companies are led by them. Therefore, this has to be investigated in a proper research. Okay. Now I have given a valid reason for my study. Now here's the problem. Okay. Right? Here's the title. Here's the problem. And now I have given a reason to do this study. So this is just the introduction section. Okay. What we do and how we do. Okay. So let me just put the divider here. Okay, so I think that is clear. Now the next thing that you need to do is to introduce your variable. Okay, now this is just the introduction section. So introduce your variables. Now here's the problem. Now you explain the problem. Now you probably should divide this into start with a new paragraph, and then you could say introduction to variables. So now what are the variables? South Asian. What exactly is meant by South Asian? What is meant by leadership? What is meant by self-efficacy? Now you have to define each of these definitions. Define. Okay. Now when you define, you need to don't get definitions from dictionaries. No dictionaries. Okay. No dictionaries. Your definitions should come from peer-reviewed papers. Okay. Definitions should be from peer-reviewed papers. Okay, so it needs to be from peer-reviewed papers. Okay, because that is extremely important. Now, once you do that, the next thing is, now your professor or maybe your teacher might ask, okay, now it is clear that you have a good problem, but why do you need to study this? What are you going to find by doing this? So your aims and objectives. So I personally did this because I wanted to investigate or explore, right, the nature of leadership among South Asian students, and then I also wanted to provide recommendations for universities and other educational institutes on how they could improve their services towards international students. Okay. Now these were two of the objectives that I had in my mind. Okay. So because of that, I wanted to do this study. Now those are the objectives. Now the next and the most important question is the research question. What is a research question? A research question is the same as your title. Now, here you have given a problem for which you have justified, like why this problem exists, right? You have defined the variables, you have given the objectives. Now you need to give a research question, because it is this question that you are going to find answers to, right? So the research question is, let's say, reasons for South Asian students to demonstrate poor leadership in college campuses. Okay, what? So this is the main research question that I have. What are the reasons for South Asians to demonstrate poor leadership in college campus? So as a byproduct of this, I am finding why these people have come up with these findings and why exactly some individuals are capable of leading these massive corporations while others cannot. So this is something that I had to find from my research. Now for this, the next one is a hypothesis. What is a hypothesis? Hypothesis is a prediction that I am making. So this bit of research methodology more than academic writing. Now, I have a group of students named South Asian students, right? So I am basically saying that these guys have equal or let's say plus or minus, okay, let's say they have more or less self-efficacy compared to rest of the college students, right? So this is something that I am interested in finding, right? So how do you write a hypothesis? So we write like a hypothesis like this, H1, okay. Let's say South Asian students demonstrate let's say South Asian students demonstrate self-efficacy which is significantly different from the rest of the students. So I am not saying whether it is it could go up like whether they have higher self-efficacy or lower efficacy. I'm just saying it is significantly different. It could be higher, it could be lesser, you never know. I'm just going to put it like that because I can't afford to make a prediction where I'm saying that it could go up, because I still don't know what could happen. So if it goes up or goes down, that is all right, because I have already done this. Now we call this H1 the alternative hypothesis. Okay, H1 is what we call the alternative hypothesis. H0 is the null hypothesis. Okay, this is the alternative and this is the null hypothesis. If your findings go against your expectations, you basically haven't found anything. So which means you are accepting your null hypothesis, which says, I write the null hypothesis here as well. Okay, null hypothesis says South Asian students do not demonstrate self-efficacy which is significantly different from the rest of the students. So remember, it says do not. So there is no difference, which means South Asian students are just like normal. They also have very normal self-efficacy, so there's nothing to talk about. But if it is significant difference, which means if it is significantly low or higher, then you have found something, because you have said there is an issue here. Ideally, it has to go up, then your problem would have some legitimacy. If it has gone down, then you pretty much agree with these guys, right? So this is your hypothesis 1, and this is your alternative hypothesis, and this is your null hypothesis. If your findings do not demonstrate anything new and pretty much says this, then you are accepting your null hypothesis, which means your research has been pretty much a waste of time, because this could happen only due to 2 reasons. The first reason is poor reasoning, right? So you have reasoned something that is not true to be true in your research paper. Mostly this happens when you don't read adequate number of research papers. If you read your research papers, if you find the reasons, then you know why exactly this is happening. So because of that, having poor reasoning is the first reason to have flawed research, so that you agree with your null hypothesis. That is poor reasoning. The next one is poor methodology. Those are the only 2 reasons for you to have this kind of research findings where you agree with your null hypothesis. So always keep this in your mind. So you have to read well before you start the research, right? If it agrees with you as you expected, so then you are accepting your alternative hypothesis, right? So this is basically a prediction that you are making. Now at this point we haven't started the research because we are still in the introduction, right? We gave the problem, we gave the aims and the objectives, research question this time. So I am basically saying, if my reasoning is true, I should be able to find this. So my title doesn't say anything. I don't know whether this is the case, but I am saying, I am reasoning. If this works like this, this is what I would get. So I would have to further emphasize on this, which I can do in my literature review. Okay. Now this is the basic introduction. So I hope this introduction is clear to all of you. Okay. Very good. Now with this, we go to our literature review. Let's get this guy down here. Okay. The second section is literature review. Why do we need to have a literature review? That is another question anyone could ask. Now here you have made a prediction. this is your prediction. Okay, you are making a prediction. Now, if you are making a prediction, by all means, I need to know how are you so sure about your prediction, right? You need to have some reasons to be this sure. So, first thing you have to do is you have to first elaborate your variables, right? Elaborate your variables. Elaborate your variables, right? And then provide a historical perspective on the problem. And then you need to find a theory. You need to find a theory that could help you to explain how this problem goes and how this could be improved, right? So this is pretty much your literature review. Okay. So elaborate your variables. Now you have three variables, right? South Asian. So explain in depth who these South Asians are and all that. Whenever you explain something, you have to always get information from credible journal articles or books, right? So do that. And then historical perspective on the problem. How exactly, who has documented this problem of lack of leadership skills in South Asians? Who has first documented it? So you have to explain the entire problem chronologically, like how it happened, how it progressed, and all that, right? So that is what you need to explain. So what are the variables? So let me write your variables. So South Asian, self-efficacy, and leadership. Those are our variables. Now here the difficult component is finding a theory. Now it is very easy to do research if it is just about getting knowledge, but if it is just like finding answers for these questions, so research is not that. You need to have a theory to support your study. There's a theory named leadership self-efficacy, which stems from the theory of self-efficacy by Albert Bandura. He's a psychologist, but has lots of implications on business studies, especially when it comes to leadership. So Bandura, if I'm not mistaken, in 1971, if not, you can find papers in 1997 as well, wrote about self-efficacy and how leadership self-efficacy works, right? So you have to explain this theory. And in relation to the theory, you have to also explain how this problem must have occurred and how it could be solved, right? So when you explain theory, first thing that you need to do is you need to explain how this problem has occurred based on this theory, okay? And you should explain how this theory is going to help you to solve this problem. So we use this theory to understand the problem and how to solve this problem. So this is what basically you do in your literature review, because you have made a prediction that South Asian students demonstrate self-efficacy which is significantly different from the rest of the students. And having said that, you also have said that you are going to find the reasons for poor leadership. The reason that you do this is to explore the nature of leadership among South Asian students and to provide recommendations for universities. So if you are to provide recommendations to universities, you just can't pull the recommendations from your mind, right? We can't do that. And then I can't say, look, I did something like this because of this. I think this, the thing. No, you can't do that. We need to have a legitimate theory. We need to have a theory to support us. Now, these theories have been tested by thousands of researchers. And we usually get that kind of valid, credible theories to support our problem. We basically say the problem exists based on a theory of our preference. And we again explain how the problem could be solved based on the theory itself. Okay, so this is exactly what we do in our literature review, right? Uh, we usually say, like getting your theories in order is a theoretical perspective. Oh, this is very important, and this is one of the hardest part of research, and then this is why this has become this philosophical in nature usually, because think about management, forget about the self, because you need to just find leadership of Sri Lankans. And if these are the problems that you have documented, you still need to find a theory to explain what leadership is. So, if you define leadership here, make sure your definition on leadership and definition on self-efficacy aligns with the theory that you are mentioning here. Because if not, those are not equal. There's a degree of non-equivalency. So theories that you use have to have a shared common ground. Because if there are major discrepancies in the theories that you use, then it's going to be another unnecessary issue. So because of that, we need to make sure this is done in such a way. So once you have done this, then comes the most interesting component, which is methods. Now, I have been teaching research methods for 5 years, and I still love talking about methods all the time. So, we mainly discuss 6 things. First thing is the design of your study, and then the sample, the tools, and then procedure, analysis, and uh, ethics. Okay. Design. Is this a qualitative study? Is this a quantitative study? Or is this a mixed design? Qualitative means you will be interviewing individuals, you are asking questions, and based on that you are uh, uh, documenting your findings. So there are different methodologies. One is phenomenology. So here we explore certain lived experiences of individuals. So my previous research on leadership is a phenomenological research where I talk to like individuals about their understanding on leadership, and based on that I found certain common themes. So understanding lived experiences and documenting their themes is what we call interpretative. Hold on. Okay, it gets messed up. Give me a second here. Yeah, interpretative phenomenological analysis. It's just a subtype of phenomenology which we call IPA. Okay, and through this we use something called thematic analysis. This is just a method of analyzing written information, thematic analysis. So here the tool is usually a questionnaire, interview questionnaire. So you go and talk to people, you note them down, and then you transcribe all of them. So you write all their answers in papers, and then you go through them and you find common themes. So we can discuss these things in depth when we do research methodology, right? So that is just if you do a qualitative one. This is qualitative, and then you can do quantitative. This is one of my favorite areas, quantitative research. So quantitative research is doing research using statistics. You can find one of my statistics books in the library. If not, I could enlighten you about some of the statistical process in involving research, which we can discuss in depth when we do research methodology. So usually research that you do with statistics, for that you need to study statistics. So there's a book by Graviter and I think Graviter and Fosano. That's a very good statistics book. And if not, howtostats.com. That's a very good place to start understanding how statistics are being done. So that is something that you could once again do as well. So if not, there's a software named, let me quickly show this to you, SPSS, IBM SPSS. So this is software that I use to analyze most of my statistical findings if you do a quantitative research study. uh, I think I have some other softwares. This JASP is a free software that you could download, and that's also good for statistical analysis. So that is something that you could use. And the mixed is when you use both this quantitative and qualitative. So mixed means quant plus qual. Okay, right. Now, first you have to think of a design. So let's say my design is phenomenology. So I'm doing a qualitative study. Just for the sake of argument, I'm considering a qualitative one because my objective is to explore. If it is a quantitative one, this needs to be investigate. Okay, explore is always a term associated with qualitative studies. That's why I use the word explore here. Okay, so I'm doing qualitative study, phenomenology, right? And now I need to know about my sample. Sample means from whom I am getting information, my informants. Now I need to usually have a small sample. Now since this is a small study, then let's say I'm going to get information from 10 university students. If it is a quantitative study, you need to get information from a bigger sample. We usually get random samples. In research papers, you will always find in the method section they discuss about the sampling technique. Now, for example, let's say you want to understand how happy people in Colombo are. If you get all the information regarding happiness from all your neighbors, the average score of your neighbors won't give anything about the average of people in Colombo, right? Because people in Colombo cannot be represented just by the individuals in your neighborhood. So that's a problem. No? So for that, we need to get a random sample. A random sample means uh, now Colombo has lots of people, like 500,000 or something, so we can't include all the people. So I am randomly picking up people, let's say about 200 for my study. So these 200 are taken completely randomly, which means all the 500,000 in the Colombo district had a similar chance of being in my study because I have taken people randomly, right? Let's say in my classroom I have 50 students, out of which I had just get 10 students for a study. So I am randomly picking up 10 students. Maybe let's say I got 50 pieces of paper, only in 10 I am drawing something, and then I put into a small jar. I like mix it up, and then I give it to students. So all the 50 students take the piece of paper. Only 10 students will have the piece of paper with a mark on it. So all the students had an equal chance of being in my study. So that's a random sample. So since the students are random, we assume that the average generated by those 10 students would represent the average of the entire 50 students in the class, more or less. Now, in the study of happiness as well, in Colombo, if I take a random sample of 200 like that from all Colombo areas 1 to 15, I should be able to get a good overall understanding about the happiness average in Colombo. But if I draw my entire sample from, Colombo 7, that might not be representative of the entire population that we have in Colombo. So random samples. Okay. There are many other sampling techniques, but those are not useful for us to be discussing right now. But I will give more guidance, if it is required when you start your research project. Since this academic writing, I just want to introduce you how this exactly works. Tools are usually, questionnaires that you use, right? Questionnaires, if not any interview guides, right? Because now you need to have an interview guide to find answers for which you could actually like transcribe and find themes, right? So the questionnaire procedure means how exactly you do this, how exactly you do this. Okay. Analysis, if you do phenomenology, you have to explain how thematic analysis work. If you do quantitative, there are lots of statistical analysis named correlations, t-tests, ANOVAs, MANOVAs, and so on, right? So those are slightly advanced techniques. So we will discuss about them when we get to research, okay? And then the ethics, from where you got the ethical approval, ethical principles followed, usually, APA ethics code, okay, this kind of things. So you explain this in the research paper, okay. After methods, the next one is documenting your results. So we are not yet in the results section. So documenting results is a whole different story which we can discuss later. And then the next component is the discussion. So here you document your findings, and here you mention whether, and you had always say here whether your hypothesis is accepted or rejected. If it is qualitative, then you don't have to worry about hypothesis, because that is something for quantitative, okay. But I just have included here just to give some guidance on what exactly happens, okay. And then the discussion, here you have to mention what went right, what went wrong, was the theory good in explaining the problem, and what are the recommendations for future research. So those are some of the things that you have to do in your discussion. Discussion is a section in its own right, which I am planning on spending more time in future to explain. But the most important thing that I wanted to do is to, get you to understand how exactly a research paper functions. I think you must have obtained a basic understanding on how the research works and how this process functions as well, right? So once all of this done, now you can write the abstract, because your entire research is now completed. Now see, we started from the title, we discussed about what are the things that need to be done in the title, okay. So those things are completed now, and then we so we completed the title, we discussed the abstract, we did a bit on the introduction, right, and then we documented the problem very well, and then we discuss about the literature review, how to do that, how to make predictions, elaborating variables, right, theory, historical perspective, theoretical perspective, and briefly on methods, results, and discussion. So this is it. This is anatomy of a research paper. So I'll give more guidance on like what needs to be read before you understand completely on how this exact process work. So let me know how it goes. So we are done with the very first section of this lecture, which is understanding the research paper, anatomy of a research paper. So if you have any questions, drop me a message, and then you probably will see the next videos like coming soon as well. Okay, thank you and have a nice day.